Caroline Leavitt, a woman who refused to be treated unfairly in public. What started as a normal trip turned into a moment that sparked national attention and an important lesson for us all. The morning rush at Union Station in Washington, D.C. was in full swing, a constant flow of travelers weaving through the grand halls, their hurried footsteps echoing off the high, vaulted ceilings. The scent of strong coffee from nearby kiosks mixed with the soft rustle of newspapers and the quiet hum of morning conversations. Trains to New York, Boston, and Philadelphia were being called over the intercom, their final boarding announcements cutting through the otherwise calm murmur of the crowd. Commuters in suits, tourists with rolling luggage, and parents juggling strollers with kids in tow filled the vast terminal. Amidst this organized chaos, Caroline Leavitt strode toward her boarding platform. Dressed in a sharp navy blazer and tailored slacks, she looked every bit the professional public figure she was known to be, calm, composed, and ready for the day ahead. Her brown leather briefcase, worn but elegant, swung gently at her side, and her phone occasionally buzzed with emails and notifications, none of which seemed urgent enough to distract her from her focus. For Caroline, traveling on the Acela Express to New York City was routine, a familiar path she had taken many times before to attend meetings, conferences, and public events. The early sunlight streamed through the glass panes of the station, casting golden beams across the marble floors, giving the busy station an almost serene glow. Nothing about the morning suggested what was about to unfold. To Caroline, this was just another day, another trip, as she moved steadily toward her gate, unaware that within minutes her peaceful routine would be disrupted. Caroline Leavitt was no stranger to public attention. As a well-known political figure and commentator, she was accustomed to the glances, whispers, and occasional stares that followed her in public spaces. At 34, Caroline carried herself with a quiet but unmistakable confidence, the kind built from years of navigating the often harsh world of politics and media. Despite her polished exterior, she valued her privacy during everyday moments like today, hoping for a smooth, uneventful trip to New York City, where she was scheduled to speak at a public forum. Her reputation as a bold voice for free speech and personal liberties often made her a target of both admiration and criticism, but she had learned to tune out the noise. Behind the boarding counter stood Amanda J., a woman in her late 30s with sharp eyes and a tightly pinned bun, her Amtrak uniform pressed to perfection. Amanda carried herself with a cold efficiency, though there was a certain edge to her demeanor, especially as her eyes landed on Caroline moving toward the gate. To her right was Maya, a much younger attendant, likely in her early 20s, new to the job and still learning the ropes. Maya offered passengers soft smiles, her nervous energy apparent in the way she kept adjusting the badge pinned to her vest. While Amanda exuded authority and control, Maya stood as a quiet observer, watching as Amanda took the lead. A little further down the station sat Thomas Reynolds, a train manager in his early 50s, sipping coffee from a paper cup as he reviewed the morning schedule. Graying at the temples, his face showed the wear of years on the job, dealing with passengers and staff alike. And scattered among them, commuters filled the waiting area, some glued to their phones, others glancing up occasionally, unaware that they were about to witness a confrontation that would ripple far beyond Union Station. The usual line of passengers forming near the gate, waiting for the call to get on the train. Caroline Leavitt checked her ticket and glanced briefly at her phone, answering a quick text from an assistant confirming her arrival time in New York. Everything seemed routine, until she noticed Amanda J. watching her closely, her eyes following Caroline's every move with a sharpness that didn't feel like simple professionalism. At first, Caroline brushed it off. She was used to being recognized, even in places like this. Sometimes people stared because they supported her, sometimes because they didn't. But as she neared the counter, the look on Amanda's face was less curiosity and more something else. Suspicion, maybe even hostility. Passengers began getting on the train when the first group was called, and Caroline, traveling business class, waited for her group's turn. As soon as she stepped forward to approach, Amanda raised a hand sharply and stopped her. "Hold on, ma'am, I'll need you to step aside for additional verification," Amanda said in a clipped tone, her eyes narrowing slightly. Caroline blinked in surprise. "Sorry? Is there a problem with my ticket?" she asked calmly, holding it out for Amanda to scan. Amanda didn't take it. "Just standard procedure. I need to check some things before you can get on the train. Please step aside." Caroline's brows furrowed. She looked around. No one else had been stopped. People behind her were being allowed to get on the train without issue. "I've traveled this route many times. What kind of additional verification?" Caroline asked, her voice polite but firm. Amanda shifted slightly but kept her cool exterior. "I'll explain in a moment. Please, step aside for now." From behind Caroline, a middle-aged man with a laptop bag gave her a curious glance. A woman a few rows back raised an eyebrow, sensing something was off. Caroline held her ground. "With respect, I'd like to know what policy this is based on before I step aside." Amanda's lips tightened. "I don't need to explain that to you. You'll need to comply, or you won't be allowed up." Nearby, Maya, the younger attendant, looked increasingly uncomfortable, glancing between Amanda and Caroline. The tension was thickening, and a few passengers had started pulling out their phones, discreetly recording. Caroline could feel the eyes on her now, some sympathetic, some confused, but she stood firm, realizing this wasn't a simple misunderstanding, but something far deeper. Caroline stood tall, refusing to step aside, her ticket still held out, untouched. Her heart was pounding now, not from fear, but from the growing realization that this was something deliberate. Around her, the line of passengers had started to slow, and people were watching, the quiet murmur of announcements fading under the growing tension at the gate. Amanda kept her posture stiff, and her tone sharp, clearly trying to maintain control. "Ma'am, you're holding up the line," Amanda snapped, her eyes cold. Caroline inhaled slowly, keeping her voice calm. "Then you can explain to everyone here why I'm the only one being asked to step aside." A murmur rippled through the waiting crowd. A woman holding a briefcase leaned over to whisper to a man nearby, and Caroline could see more phones being raised, passengers now openly recording the situation. Behind Amanda, Maya looked increasingly nervous, her hands fidgeting with the lanyard around her neck. She stepped closer to Amanda, speaking softly. "Maybe we should just—" Amanda cut her off without looking, her jaw tight. "I've got this handled." Caroline remained steady. "If you've got this handled, then you can tell me why I'm being singled out. I've done nothing wrong, my ticket is valid, and no one else has been stopped." Amanda's eyes flashed. "We reserve the right to reject anyone we feel may cause a disruption." The word disruption hung heavily in the air. Caroline's mouth tightened. She had heard enough public excuses like that before, thinly veiled justifications for bias. A man standing nearby with a backpack shook his head visibly, muttering, "This is ridiculous." Caroline took a breath and responded firmly, "How exactly am I a disruption? Is it because you don't like who I am, my work, my views? Because if that's what this is about, I'm not going to quietly step aside so you can make an example out of me." A few heads in the line nodded, and one woman near the front said, "Let her board already." Amanda's eyes darted to the passengers, realizing that public opinion was shifting fast and against her, but she clung to her stance. "It's for everyone's safety." Caroline's brow arched. "Safety? You're welcome to call security. TSA's right over there. But if this is about safety, I expect you to follow proper protocol, not make up rules on the spot." From the side, a man in a business suit called out, "Yeah, if she's a problem, call security. Otherwise, stop wasting time." Amanda's mouth twitched, realizing her control was slipping. Her cheeks flushed as passengers began voicing their support more openly. Maya stood awkwardly behind her, glancing around as though unsure if she should step in or stay silent. Still calm, Caroline leveled a final glance at Amanda. "I'm not stepping aside unless there's a real reason, and from what I can tell, there isn't." The standoff was no longer just between Caroline and Amanda. It had become a public battle, and Amanda was quickly losing ground. Just as the tension at the gate reached its peak, a calm but firm male voice broke through the standoff. "What's going on here?" Everyone turned to see Thomas Reynolds, the station's train manager, walking briskly toward the boarding area, his navy blue Amtrak blazer and ID badge clearly identifying his authority. His brow was furrowed, and he glanced between Caroline and Amanda with a look of quiet concern. Amanda visibly straightened, as though bracing herself, but Caroline caught the subtle shift in her posture. She wasn't as confident anymore. Thomas approached Amanda first, his voice low but clear enough to be heard by those nearby. "Amanda, what's the issue? Why hasn't this passenger been allowed to board?" Amanda, regaining a bit of her earlier sharpness, replied quickly, "I'm exercising my right to refuse boarding to Ms. Leavitt for potential disruption. I'm following our guidelines." Thomas's eyes flicked to Caroline, then back to Amanda, clearly skeptical. "What disruption? Has she said or done anything inappropriate?" Amanda hesitated, and that hesitation said everything. She swallowed before answering, "I have concerns, sir, about safety." Thomas's frown deepened. "What specific concerns? This is a routine boarding, and I see no security alert." Caroline, calm but firm, took that moment to speak up. "Sir, my name is Caroline Leavitt. My ticket is valid. I've traveled this route countless times. I've complied with every policy. I'm being singled out, and I think everyone here deserves to know why." The surrounding passengers nodded in agreement, and someone near the back muttered, "Exactly." Thomas looked directly at Amanda. "Amanda, if there's no documented cause, she boards. Period." Amanda's jaw tightened. "I'm just following what I believe is appropriate." Caroline didn't flinch. "Or following what you feel about me?" she asked, her voice unwavering. "Because if this is about my politics, or who I am, let's be honest about it. But I'm not going to be shamed out of boarding a train I paid for." The crowd murmured louder now, phones raised and recording. The man in the suit from earlier called out again, "Yeah, let her on already. This is ridiculous." Thomas sighed heavily, clearly frustrated. "Amanda, step aside. Ms. Leavitt is boarding now." Amanda's lips pressed into a thin line, but she obeyed, stepping back just enough for Caroline to move forward. But Caroline wasn't done. She turned to Thomas, her gaze steady. "I want to file a formal complaint, right here, right now. Not later, not over email. This isn't something you're going to sweep under the rug." A murmur of approval rippled through the waiting passengers. Thomas straightened. "We can, absolutely, take your statement now, ma'am." Amanda, now flushed and clearly realizing she had lost, stood silently behind him. Caroline knew the battle wasn't over, but she had won this round. The tension at the gate was thick as Thomas Reynolds stood between Amanda and Caroline, his jaw tight with frustration. Passengers had gone from quietly observing to openly supporting Caroline, many holding up their phones, clearly documenting every word. Amanda, who had seemed so in control just minutes ago, now stood rigid, her face flushed and her arms crossed tightly over her chest. She was no longer in charge. Everyone knew it. Thomas turned to Caroline, his tone measured but sincere. "Leavitt, I do apologize for this situation. You are cleared to board immediately." Caroline nodded politely, though she didn't move yet. She wasn't ready to let the matter slide without clarity. "Thank you, but before I board, I want to be very clear. I'm requesting a formal, written record of this incident, including the reasons given for delaying me." Thomas hesitated for only a moment before nodding firmly. "Understood. I'll make sure that's documented." Amanda bristled at this but remained silent, though the anger was written all over her face. "I still think she's a disruption," Amanda muttered under her breath, though loud enough for everyone to hear. Caroline turned to her sharply but remained composed. "A disruption for standing in line like every other passenger? Or because you don't like who I am?" Amanda didn't answer. Thomas, seeing this exchange, stepped in firmly. "That's enough. Amanda, I need you to step back from the boarding area." Amanda hesitated, her hands clenching before turning and walking stiffly toward the counter, defeated. A ripple of low applause and nods of approval moved through the line. Passengers exchanged glances of solidarity, a woman near the front smiling and saying softly, "Good for her." With Amanda out of the way, Thomas gestured, "You may board now, Ms. Leavitt." Caroline took a breath, squaring her shoulders. She picked up her bag, giving a small but knowing nod to the passengers who had supported her. As she walked toward the train, she felt a shift, not just for herself, but for everyone who had witnessed the confrontation. Something had changed in that moment. The power Amanda thought she held had been taken back, and fairness had prevailed. At least for now. Caroline stepped onto the train, still feeling the weight of what had just unfolded at the gate. As she found her seat by the window, she exhaled slowly, releasing the tension she had held so tightly while standing her ground. Around her, other passengers who had witnessed the confrontation gave her small nods of acknowledgement and a few whispered words of support as they passed by. But Caroline knew it wasn't over. Minutes later, as the train was preparing to depart, Thomas Reynolds appeared in the doorway of her car, pausing to glance around before approaching her seat. His expression was professional but slightly guarded, as though he were treading carefully now. "Miss Levy," he began in a low voice, leaning slightly so others wouldn't easily overhear, "may I have a quick word with you?" Caroline gestured to the empty seat across from her. "Right here is fine," she said, her tone polite but firm. Thomas sat down, folding his hands in his lap. "I want to again apologize for what happened at the gate," he said. "That's not how we handle passengers, and I regret that you were treated that way." Caroline studied him for a moment. "With all due respect, I appreciate the apology, but what's actually going to be done about it?" Thomas shifted uncomfortably. "We'll be reviewing Amanda's behavior internally," he replied, though the words sounded rehearsed. Caroline raised an eyebrow. "Is that another way of saying nothing will happen unless the public keeps watching?" Thomas paused. "I can't speak to the final outcome, but I can assure you that this isn't being ignored." Caroline leaned forward slightly. "Because you should know, if this is happening to me, it's happening to people who don't have cameras pointed at them, and they deserve better too." Thomas nodded slowly, clearly aware she wasn't going to let this be brushed aside. "I hear you, Ms. Leavitt, and I'll be passing this along to higher management personally." Caroline sat back, her gaze steady. "Good, because I plan to speak about this publicly, and not just for me." Thomas exhaled and rose from the seat. "Understood." As he walked away, Caroline knew her next steps were clear. She wasn't done fighting yet. By the time Caroline's train pulled into New York City, her phone was buzzing nonstop, messages, calls, social media notifications flooding in faster than she could keep up. Somewhere between Baltimore and Philadelphia, videos of the confrontation had gone viral, first on Twitter, then across every major platform. The footage captured by several passengers showing Amanda blocking Caroline from boarding and refusing to give a reason had sparked outrage across the country. By now, hashtags like Stand With Caroline, Travel Rights, and Bias Exposed were trending, with millions of people weighing in. Some were furious, demanding accountability from Amtrak, while others shared their own experiences of being unfairly treated in public spaces. Major news outlets had picked up the story, and by the time Caroline reached her hotel room, she was being bombarded with requests for interviews. Headlines screamed across her phone screen: "Political commentator blocked from train over disruption," "Caught on video," and "Amtrak employee sparks outrage after denying boarding to public figure." People from all walks of life, public figures, journalists, and ordinary travelers, were commenting and reposting the video, amplifying the call for action. What stood out most to Caroline were the messages from people who had faced similar discrimination, but never had the platform to fight back. A woman named Julia messaged, sharing her story of being removed from a flight for looking suspicious because of her political views. A retired teacher recounted being treated rudely at a hotel check-in desk, left feeling humiliated because of what she believed. Story after story poured in. Proof that Caroline's experience wasn't an isolated event, but part of a broader problem many people were too scared to challenge. Meanwhile, Amtrak scrambled to respond. Their initial statement was vague, claiming they were aware of an incident and were investigating, but the public wasn't having it. The comments under Amtrak's official posts were relentless, with thousands demanding the employee's removal and calling for transparency in how the case was handled. One user posted, "You can't hide behind investigating when there's clear video proof. Do better." Another wrote, "If this can happen to Caroline Leavitt, imagine what happens to people without millions of followers." Adding fuel to the fire, several well-known figures, journalists, politicians, and even celebrities, tweeted in support of Caroline, turning the story into a nationwide conversation about bias in public spaces. By evening, national news outlets were airing the footage, and pundits were debating the broader implications of what had happened, asking whether policies meant to ensure safety were being used instead to target people for their beliefs. As Caroline sat on her hotel bed watching the coverage unfold, she realized this was no longer just her story. It was everyone's story. And now the nation was watching to see what Amtrak and Caroline herself would do next. As the public outcry intensified, Amtrak could no longer stay silent. By the following morning, amid relentless media coverage and trending hashtags, the company released a second, more direct statement. This time they acknowledged that an employee had violated company policy regarding the fair treatment of passengers, and confirmed that the individual had been placed on administrative leave pending formal review. But the response felt too little, too late for many watching the situation unfold. Comment sections exploded with frustration and calls for stronger action, with thousands demanding to know why Caroline had been targeted and how the company planned to prevent such discrimination in the future. Meanwhile, insider reports began to leak to journalists, revealing that Amanda had faced prior complaints for rude and biased behavior, raising even more questions about how she had been allowed to continue working in such a sensitive, customer-facing role. This revelation only deepened the public's anger, suggesting that what happened to Caroline might be part of a broader pattern rather than an isolated mistake. Behind the scenes, Amtrak's executives scrambled to manage the crisis, meeting with public relations teams and reviewing the footage circulating online. Legal experts began weighing in on news programs, many stating that Caroline might have grounds for a discrimination lawsuit, which could further damage the company's reputation. For Caroline, however, this wasn't just about one employee or even one company. It was about sending a message. She knew that without public pressure, this issue would likely be buried like so many others. In a statement shared on her social media, she wrote, "This isn't just about me. It's about making sure no one else is treated this way simply for who they are or what they believe. We can't stay silent on this." Her words quickly gained traction, and it became clear that the public expected real accountability, not just corporate lip service. As the dust began to settle, Caroline found herself reflecting on the whirlwind of the past few days. Seated in her quiet hotel room, overlooking the New York skyline, she sipped her coffee and scrolled through the countless messages still pouring into her inbox, some from strangers thanking her, others from fellow travelers sharing their own experiences of quiet discrimination that had never made headlines. Though exhausted from the media storm, Caroline felt a deep sense of resolve. This wasn't just about what had happened to her. It was about everyone who had ever been silenced, dismissed, or treated unfairly without anyone to witness it. Later that afternoon, as she stepped out for a walk along the busy city streets, a middle-aged woman approached her carefully, recognition in her eyes. "Ms. Leavitt, I hope I'm not intruding," she began, a soft but sincere smile on her face. "I just wanted to say thank you. I've flown and taken trains my whole life, and I've seen people treated badly, but I never thought someone would stand up to it so publicly." Caroline felt a lump in her throat, realizing how deeply the incident had resonated. "Thank you for saying that," she replied, smiling gently. "I didn't expect any of this to happen, but I couldn't let it slide." As they parted ways, Caroline reflected on how one simple refusal to back down had sparked a much bigger conversation. Amanda had tried to make her an example, to shame her publicly, but in the end it was Amanda who faced accountability. Yet, even as Caroline took some satisfaction in that fact, she knew the work wasn't over. For every person like her, there were countless others without a public platform. That evening, in an interview, Caroline summed up what she had learned. "You don't have to be famous to stand up for yourself. You just have to believe you deserve respect. And when people see you stand up, it reminds them that they deserve respect too." Her story wasn't just about confrontation. It was a reminder that speaking up can change things, even if it's uncomfortable. And in that quiet victory, Caroline knew she had done more than win a fight. She had sparked a reminder that fairness is worth demanding. Always. The story of Caroline Leavitt's experience at Union Station teaches a powerful lesson about the importance of standing up against unfair treatment, even when it feels uncomfortable or intimidating. Caroline's refusal to quietly accept being singled out reminds us that dignity and fairness are not privileges, they are rights that everyone deserves regardless of their background or beliefs. By calmly demanding an explanation and holding her ground in front of a growing crowd, Caroline showed that one voice can challenge injustice, and that sometimes simply saying no to mistreatment can inspire others to speak up too. Her courage also highlights the need for accountability in public service roles, reminding us that people in authority must act fairly and without bias. The public response, from strangers supporting her to national media coverage, proved that when injustice is exposed, people are willing to rally behind what's right. Ultimately, the lesson is clear. If we want a fair society, we must be willing to speak up when we see wrong, for ourselves and others. Because sometimes, it takes just one person refusing to back down to remind everyone that respect, fairness, and dignity should never be negotiable.